that's the framework that we're going to be having today. That being said, I would like to invite our first panelists on. So if you can, I will turn off the slide. All right. And I would like to invite Rodrigo and Robin, if you can get up to the panelist area, turn on your cameras and microphones, and we can get started. Very, very good. I think it's only fair. Let's start off with a round of applause. Very, very good. Let's get those applause in. All right, good. So we all learn the functionalities. Fantastic. Good. So very nice to have both of you with us. Going to start with applause. We'll also finish with it. That being said, since we're starting on time, we're doing things the right way, I would like each of you to just give us a 30-second intro to who you are and how you got into the space. All right, so we can start out with you, Robin. Go for it.
Yeah, my name is Robin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apheris. What we do with Apheris is we provide secure, governed, and private access to data for machine learning purposes, as well in a federated manner. And how we got to that problem, we built a previous company in the genomics space and always stumbled upon the problem of sensitive data that cannot be moved across boundaries, organizational boundaries in that circumstance, and build out a technical solution to solve for exactly that problem.
Very, very good. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And how about you, Rodrigo?
Yeah, so I've been working, hopefully you can hear me okay. I've been working in the space of research platforms for life sciences for a number of years, and increasingly seeing federated approaches being important. And we, running global collaborations in science, and wanted to kind of make that step forward. So recently I joined OWKIN as VP of Engineering to develop that further into the ML space.
Right. Wonderful. Good. Very nice to have you today. So we'll start out with you, Robin. In terms of challenges that data custodians are facing when they have to think about how to leverage sensitive data for ML purposes, what are the things that they need to keep in mind? And really from this point of data is something that has to be respected, it has to be cared for. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I'd like to point out that we are currently seeing an interesting paradigm shift in AI where the models are getting commoditized, right? More and more pre-trained models as commodities from like Hugging Face or NVIDIA Catalog, or like models that are out there. And so for many organizations that either own certain data or have means to capture data sets, data is becoming more and more their true differentiator to build truly compelling models by taking these pre-trained models and fitting them, customizing it, be it fine-tuning, retraining, distilling information from them. So that's a paradigm shift that we are seeing. And so more and more companies that are dealing with data are realizing that they need to think about ways to, let's say, commercialize their data assets. And commercialization can mean direct data monetization or just building AI-enabled data products internally or externally. And then often what happens is these organizations are starting to try to break down what type of regulations they need to comply with. And there's a multitude of different regulations. Privacy regulations, we are talking about new AI regulations coming up that are addressing this. There's like industry-specific regulations. I don't know, think of MedTech, the Cyber Resilience Act. So many different regulations that essentially make it really hard for data custodians, both internally, but in particular as well to external organizations, provide access to their data in a way that they know my data stays protected, I don't diminish the value, and I comply with regulation. And I think that's a big, big challenge across industries. And Rodrigo will know all about it because, you're operating in one of these industries, so this is a big challenge.
I think this is great, and I think it's something that we can almost have as a common theme throughout all the conversations we're going to be having today. When we talk about data stakeholders, this clash between technical and legal, or is it a clash? Is it an overlap? Do technical, data scientists, how deeply do they need to dig into this if they're working in one part of the world, but their customers are in another part? And this is, of course, where we get into edge, is that, where does one job start and another begin? In terms of your experience, Rodrigo, how and why does OWKIN use federated approaches? And perhaps it might be useful for you to start out with how you define when we're talking about federated learning when you're out there explaining these concepts.
Sure. So OWKIN is an AI biotech, and we do clinical research on our own account and for our pharmaceutical partners, customers. And in future, we're thinking about clinical development. And federated learning has really helped us to reach out to some really high value data sets. So we want to work with rich multimodal patient data in some key academic medical centers. And so we've developed a network and an open source framework for for federated learning. And that's built on the ability for data scientists to send their training tasks to where the data is without moving the data. So it keeps the data under the control of the institution that generated it typically. There's lots of detail to how you do that, but the complexity comes from making some of the machine learning training cycles work in that setting. So how do I do rapid iterations over data and still retain the trust with the data owners? So there's some real advantages to us, particularly allowing us to do multi-centric research with privacy. And a lot of the drivers for that are the variety of data that we can have access to that way. You find that if you train on one center's data, particularly things like we've been doing with cancer diagnostics, machine learning for cancer diagnostics, you can overfit to a particular way of working in a center. But if you can work across centers, you get a real benefit from that. And yeah, I mean, just dealing with some of the issues that Robin dealt with, local regulation. If we can devolve the management of the regulation to the owners of the data, I think we can scale up better. And that's been our experience, to be fair.
Okay, fantastic. With that in mind too, just to follow up on that, we talk about data ownership, data governance. Robin, as a CEO, when you're out there interacting with folks who perhaps don't have as much experience and you have to explain some of these concepts, how do you go about it saying, okay, on a need-to-know basis, if you've got to know just a couple of things, these are definitely things that cannot be missed?
Yeah. So I think Rodrigo explained it beautifully in terms of how to, what's the key underlying principle of how you can address these problems in a more scalable manner is you keep data where it resides. And I mean, this whole, let's say this whole event is all about that lots of data is captured with in the field essentially, right? At the edge, close to owned by certain organizations. And moving that data is a lot of pain as well from a regulatory perspective and a technical perspective. And I think there's as well a paradigm shift that we are seeing as more and more things move to the edge, that you as well can start moving computation requests to the edge. And that means managing access to data and as well managing the compliance based on how you would essentially assess if you can process data for a certain purpose, for internal purposes. And that's what companies, at least digitally mature companies, have started to build up over the last years, right? So they do have let's say, privacy compliance people that know how to run a data protection impact assessment, if it's, for example, personally identifiable information, or data custodians that know how to deal with their industry-specific regulation when it comes to, I don't know, security critical infrastructure. What can you do with such data that arises in those? That's what companies have. And so by keeping and analyzing data close to where it resides, you empower these people to essentially build upon their own knowledge and build upon essentially the principles and processes they've built up to make data accessible for internal purposes. And I think some key aspects that are critical to get right is the relationship between security, governance, and privacy as you're dealing with, let's say, data or insights that flow across boundaries. And what do we mean with security, governance, and privacy? So security is that idea that you essentially only provision data as well for the models that you are essentially willing to process that data with. So you point to a certain set of models and say, yes, my data can be processed by these models. And you can as well tag these models with properties, right? Give them a certain purpose if you want to map that to PII data, consent structures, or similar. Privacy is that you ensure that the output of a given training has certain properties, and that this output cannot be reverse engineered to reconstruct underlying sensitive data. That's the notion of output privacy. It's as well a property of a model. And then governance is typically that relationship and mapping that to what type of data do you have within your environments, and what type of properties do you have within those data sets. And so, yeah, that relationship is really critical to get right. So we sometimes call that GovPrivSec, so the combination of governance, privacy, and security. And I think that opens up essentially a way to map that to different regulatory requirements, privacy regulation, AI regulation, but as well internal obligations, right? So the ability to not move data if it's security critical across a certain boundary. Yeah.
Good. Fantastic. Thank you. Rodrigo, in terms of your network, what are the things that you want to see happen that will drive adoption? What are the factors that will drive adoption of federated learning?
So I guess we're seeing that in general, if I look at our use case and working with hospitals as generators of data, and definitely that seeing federation as a way of keeping control of their data, but still benefit from collaboration. We are still in a lot of places, particularly in Europe, we're in a lot of people are in a transition towards types of computing. Data sovereignty is super important. There's some concerns about cloud, and federated approaches gives them kind of an option in this. When it comes down to the science and the kind of medical use case, really sample sizes are a big issue. We're talking about situations where it's a different kind of edge from the one we're talking about today, but there's an edge between being able to decide between one type of cancer or another type of cancer, or someone's ability to respond to data. And so nobody has enough examples of the edge cases. And so by creating a community and an ecosystem of data sharing and learning, that drives it. We also see that open source has been good for us and important to us to drive adoption. It brings some transparency. It attracts researchers who want to evolve machine learning techniques. Federated learning is a research field in its own right, and people are developing new ways of doing it. So those factors have driven. I mean, we've seen some nice examples in. Recently, for example, we worked with the NIH on some US institutions around taking our framework that we had worked mainly in histopathology and clinical settings, and it was now being applied to voice data. So federating over voice data with the Bridge to AI project. So that's kind of an interesting example where people see the opportunity because there are frameworks that are accessible and yeah, you can create your own networks as well as work with networks like the one we provide and work with.
Like that. As someone who works, a lot with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, particularly on the open source side, Robin, is that something that you're seeing a lot of as well too in Apheris in terms of making this more transparent, inviting new voices to the conversation? Is it something we can expect more of in the future? Or are there any obstacles to making open source more part of this as this develops?
Yeah, so I think open source is, I think, a key driver of various aspects, including, let's say, interoperability in terms of how you integrate with the broader ecosystem. And I completely agree, in particular with respect to federation. So OWKIN has developed their own federation framework, which I think is a great step and great contribution. And there are as well like some other open source frameworks out there. We integrate with those. And I think this like pushing things open source as well ensures that you play well with the ecosystem. And if you look at what currently happens in terms of how AI is being brought to market and essentially how the new AI tech stack is being built, I think it's critical for any business that builds up AI-enabled data products, that builds up services around that, to play really well with the ecosystem. And so, let's say, taking the right open source approaches, frameworks, I think is very important. That being said, I do as well think that, in particular, organizations that are sitting on valuable data assets need as well to think about, how do I find repeatable ways to open up this data for the multitude of commoditized models that are essentially like being brought to market out there. And I think finding repeatability here is not a trivial thing, because models have different properties. Your data has different, often different, like comes from different machines, or has different consent structures as it's being captured. And so this relationship of how do I essentially unlock the value of my data in a world where models are being commoditized and offered on a broader market, I think open source is a critical contributor and a critical component to that. But typically, companies need to build out their own stack, partly with, let's say, software solutions, and partly as well building that out to make a repeatable offering, in terms of how they provision access to data for multiple customers. So,
okay, good. So I think we can all agree that ignoring open source would be a significant mistake, because you're isolating yourself, not getting access to knowledge, input, feedback that of things that might be obvious, you might think are might be obvious to one or to another. One thing I would like to ask both of you, though, in terms of moving forward, if there was one major obstacle that you could remove in order for federated learning to be adopted more widely, what would that be? Let's start with you, Rodrigo.
So I'm a big proponent of our ecosystem taking a choice for interoperability. I think I totally agree with what Robin was saying around reliability. As a service provider, we have different business models potentially, but in the end, our users, our customers need interoperability. They need to reach where the data is. And so if we can agree on broad open standards that allow us to expand our networks and get our networks to talk to each other, I think that's a great thing. So that's a big one for me. If I can squeeze another one in, there's the whole question around just how the field of ML and AI is evolving very rapidly, and when your CEO says, okay, how can we make a large language model, a foundation model work over this network? Are we fine tuning? Are we training from scratch? Those are big challenges, but interoperability I think is one of the underlying things that hopefully will drive growth for us.
Okay, fantastic, good. What about you, Robin?
Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree.
We need to find something you disagree about. Which one of you likes pineapple pizza? No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I'll add a different point to it. I think one of the complexities, and that's not just with, let's say, federated learning per se, that's the ability to leverage data for machine learning purposes when it spans across boundaries that can still be like not being connected by a federation framework, but just you want to make use data across a certain boundary. I think one of the big challenges that we are seeing is just how fast and simple do the stakeholders that own that can provision access to that. And that has to do as well, that has to do, like, do I have the right tools and, let's say, the right data standards from an interoperability perspective in place, but it's as well, how do the tools that we build as an ecosystem make it really easy for those stakeholders to do that and really care. And I think in particular, when you look at the whole governance, privacy, security, compliance field, those are like, in particular in the EU, we tend to write like hundreds of pages of quite complex regulation. So breaking that down and making that simple is very hard. And that's why the initiatives that Rodrigo is supporting, they are super, super, super hard to get off. And so just tribute to the great work that OWKIN is doing in the field in doing that. And that requires lots of very smart people that as well like solve these problems. I think we can do all by building products that are just like very simple and very easy to use and provide that clarity to those stakeholders. And I think the whole federation community can do more towards like making it more simple, like one click, seamless to deploy, become ubiquitous to the tech stack. That's where we need to get to, and reducing complexity, I think, is critical for that.
Good, and to add the part about complexity, because right, it's complex to make things simple. In the context of foundation models, how should organizations be, Robin, in your case, be thinking about federated architectures? Once again, from this, let's make it simple. What would be your 2 cents there?
Yeah, my 2 cents would be the organization that is owning or having the rights to process such data, you are sitting on the most valuable asset. So what you should be doing is get that data machine learning ready. That has to do with setting on the right standards, and as well like making sure that just from a machine learning perspective, it's like captured and prepared in the right manner. And then B, make sure that you build repeatable principles in terms of how you can provide access to that data for machine learning purposes. And I think that has to do with how do you integrate with a new tech stack that is being built. And there are obviously lots of great tools out there that make that easy, but this repeatability in terms of how you assess, how you provide access to it is critical for organizations when they think about collaborating, because ideally you would do that like over and over again for various different purposes, and you can assess that really fast. So.
Fantastic. Like you said, it's one thing to do something once, but that repeatability aspect definitely is something that needs to be built into it. We're getting towards the end, so audience members, if you have questions that you would like to ask, if you'd like to raise your hand to ask it live, if you'd like to ask it in the chat, please do so. But while you're doing that, I'd like to ask both of you just really quickly, as a sort of, final thought, summary in terms of what we can expect next, what people should keep in mind. We've heard about repeatability. We've heard about interoperability. We've talked about open source. We've talked about the regulatory aspects, stakeholders, data governance, different topics. In terms of things that you're really excited about seeing, though, in 30 seconds, how would you narrow that down to what you're excited about, for the rest of the year? Let's maybe even dip into 2024. We're already in summer, so if we're in summer, we're already in Christmas. If we're in Christmas, we're in the new year. But Rodrigo, in your case, how would you summarize that? The things that are catching your attention that people should have in mind.
I think thinking about it's great that people are, as Robin said, are prepared to invest in their data and be ML ready. I think think about the other side of that equation. If you want to collaborate with cutting edge researchers and companies that are trying to do things, I think there's two things that you need to think about. One of them, over and above preparing your data, which I totally agree with as well, it's recognize that your idea of what infrastructure is going to be needed is probably out of date, and just be open to that conversation. Maybe it needs much more hardware than you think, or maybe you really need to go to the cloud. That's a big deal. Yeah, I guess the other one is think about the confidentiality of those models as well. What are you really concerned about when someone's running a federated learning job in your environment? Are you concerned about the code or the outputs? So think about your output checking. That's your top priority, maybe. But give the startup or the collaborators their own confidentiality as well. So I think those are important aspects to consider that maybe are underplayed.
Underplayed and undervalued in terms of conversations. Like you said, as much as there's been the cloud boom, we have people now going back from the cloud to on-prem to physical. It's an ongoing conversation. It didn't end just because we have major cloud providers now that are driving that business forward. So I think that's good. And I think with both of you, what you're saying is, we talk about MLOps, we talk about AI ops, we talk about lots of different things with ops. Another one that I've heard from some folks in the cloud native ecosystem say is empathy ops. Really putting the end user at the focus and saying, at a human level, how can we make this less painful, less tiring? Robin, in your case, what are you looking forward to? What's on your mind? What should folks have on their radar?
Yeah. So it's again really hard for me to disagree with Rodrigo. So you're really making it hard for me.
This is not to say Robin isn't opinionated and can't debate.
No. So I think what I'm really excited about is just how fast we are seeing innovation in the whole let's say foundation model space, and I expect a lot more innovation with respect to properties of foundation models. And in particular, if we look at like different regulations out there, I think what companies are, there are like a couple of things why organizations are struggling to adopt this new way of working. And that is how do I keep my data private, and how do I protect it as well from a copyright perspective? And then B, how do I make sure that I'm actually allowed to leverage these models in particular as like they are provisioned as black boxes and we don't understand like fully their properties. And I think there's a lot of innovation around that happening, from like explainability to certain model architectures that preserve privacy to trustworthiness and how they are being provisioned. So lots of innovation within the tech stack that can be leveraged to as well make it safe, make it reliable to adopt these models. And I think, just how the modeling suite is being brought to market is really exciting and will drive a lot of adoption going forward from these companies that have the true assets to leverage those, which are the companies that sit on the valuable data. So yeah.
Good. We got one question, and then we got to move on to the next panel. So I got to scroll up real quick. So from JN, thank you very much. Who is going to be who brings standards for interoperability? It's been a decade-long issue. Every company is trying to go on their own way with data and its structure. So 30-second answer. Who wants to take it? Rodrigo's got it. Go for it.
Just very quickly. I mean, we're totally open to suggestion, but in the omics space, and maybe Robin, you've been through this before. There are organizations like Global Alliance for Genomics and Health that have tried to define some lower level standards that we can build on top, that you can build machine learning workloads on top of. So we're asking ourselves the question: is this one something we should invest more in? So happy to look for those standards. So there are some domain specific areas that can help, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would add that for certain machine learning problems, you can as well try to look at what are input factors that you can feed in and produce structured data out of it. So there are obviously as well tools and techniques to do that. Not claiming that this is the only solution, but it's definitely a solution to look into. So how can you leverage models itself to produce meaningful standards? And I think that's something that we're seeing in various use cases as well.
Great. That being said, let me see. We got something we need to share with all you. Too many tabs open as usual. So while you've been talking, we have someone who's been lurking in the background. And let me get this open. Very, very good. So if I can just share my screen, jump out of you. Sorry. And while we're at it, I would like to ask our next panelist to step forward. So we'll be sharing this on Twitter, but we have a wonderful, see, you're going to have to see my entire screen. Apologize for that. We have a, very good. So we have a wonderful graphic recorder. I assume, can you see this? Yes?
Nice.
Yeah. So we have a wonderful graphic recorder who's been creating a visual summary of the things we've been speaking about. There's a lot of stuff that we covered, so he's going to be adding some details. But just want to let folks know that we have an amazing artist, Angel, who's very, very talented at bringing these technical concepts. Yeah, we can give a round of applause. Good job. Yeah. So that being said, you can expect to see this. Yeah, this is nice. Good. And also a round of applause for our panelists who did a really, really good job. I think that, we covered a lot of ground here, and I appreciate both of you being so succinct so that we were able to, like I said, get to a lot of different topics and understand that there's so many more conversations that we can expect to have about this topic as we move forward. So Robin and Rodrigo, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. All right. Bye. Take care.